Rhys, perhaps you could tell me how you first got interested in Dylan Thomas.
Well, I was kind of, you know, when you're Welsh, I guess he's always in your orbit or your universe. So, you know, I grew up, my father's, I wouldn't say a big fan, but I would have heard Dylan Thomas, you know, as a teenager, and it wasn't, unfortunately, and surprisingly, actually, a poet that we studied, you know, or addressed in school in any way, shape or form. I think that's kind of strange to say the least, but we didn't. So then, you know, so Dylan Thomas was always there. I kind of knew who he was. I knew he was a Welsh poet, and but I didn't know how great a poet he is. And I guess my first kind of real inquiry or experience of Dylan's work was a production of Under Milkwood at the National Theatre, which we performed, I think, not far off, you know, 15, 20 years ago now, and it was the first kind of all Welsh cast that the National Theatre had ever assembled, which is again a total surprise, you know, given the talent we have here in Wales. Anyway, it was an extraordinary experience. One in getting to know Dylan's work via Under Milkwood, and getting to explore it, you know, in the company of such, you know, great Welsh actors. We really felt we were doing a dawn raid across the border. And it was directed by Roger Michel, who isn't Welsh, but also had, you know, went to great lengths to inquire us about, you know, the kind of finite detail of Under Milkwood that is, I guess you could say, exclusively and exquisitely Welsh. You know, the minutiae in his observations. So that was a really beautiful experience, and then since then, you know, that kind of triggered me into reading, you know, his many short stories, which, you know, his prose is just absolutely beautiful. One line springs to mind just now. It was my birthday a few days ago, and I was presented with a silent hullabaloo of balloons, you know, which is a line from one of Dylan's short stories. I just think, and I think generally that's a theme in Dylan's writing, you know, that there's a wonderful onomatopoeia to it. It's kind of very sensual, vocally, not just physically, you know, and I think I can only, as a performer, compare him to Shakespeare in that sense, is that he is a poet that cries out to be performed or spoken. That's when Dylan Thomas really, really works. I mean, there's so many other poets that have, you know, an intellectual, academic appeal, but you understand Dylan Thomas on that level, of course, but also there's a sonic understanding, I think, to his writing that is that transcends intelligence. He paints literally with sound, and I find that thrilling every time. I've never sat and silently read Dylan Thomas. I've always read it out loud.
Well, of course, he famously said when he first produced Under Milkwood, "Love the words."
Absolutely.
And that, I suppose, is Dylan, isn't it? And it's that ability with that one sentence which you quoted,
yeah, to
set up an image of it.
Well, that and you know, ironically, there's a line in, you know, Hamlet says to the players, you know, speak it trippingly on the tongue, you know. So there's a correlation there again, you know. It's to love the words, you have to taste them, and to taste them, you have to speak them. Yeah. So yeah.
Of course, in Twin Town, the film that you starred with your brother, there's a reference to Dylan Thomas at the very start of that film.
Yes, he described Swansea as an ugly, lovely town, and there's a quote in front of the station the graveyard of ambition or something, and we decided to call it a pretty shitty city, which I think, you know, of course, I in some ways I think, you know, Twin Town is an evolution somewhat of Dylan's, certainly Dylan's Mischief. So you know, there was I do love that about Dylan. You know, there is, you know, for all his grandeur as a poet, you know, there's always this kind of underlying sense of mischief and subversion in his work, which is, you know, to me thrilling. You know, and I think it's quite it shows a humility in Dylan as well. You know, that he
well, I suppose Under Milk Wood is that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's something that I imagine, if it wasn't Dylan that produced it, or that wrote it, that it would never have been produced in 1953.
No, no. I think there's a real, you know, when you know, and I know this piece very well by now, and I think it's a number of things. What it isn't is a satire on Welshness or Welsh life. It's actually a very affectionate homage, I think, and I'd imagine that Dylan, you know, it's an imagined halcyon Wales of sorts, and given Dylan's travel and his very real homesickness at times, I think this was, Under Milk Wood was kind of an antidote to that. So there's a real kind of, there's a real affection in Milkwood, I think, not necessarily to Wales as a concept, but to you know, a halcyon memory of a close community where one feels kind of safe in and accepted.
Well, yeah, I think that is interesting, because people say that it was written in different places or about different places. I think what's interesting is that he first put forward that concept of a town that was mad as a 17-year-old,
yes,
and called it Llareggub.
Yeah.
And from then on, he gathered his notes.
Of course, I think you know,
20 years before he wrote it.
And we filmed in Solbach. You know, there's it's rumoured there that Dylan would have visited. He certainly did visit Pembrokeshire. He had family there. You know, so I think Llareggub, the Llareggub we know, is an amalgamation of an experiential amalgamation of home, if you like to call it that. You know, so it's all embracing in that sense. It certainly isn't about Lan as such. No.
You've been filming now for the last 6 weeks. I have to point out that you are in character at the moment.
I am. No, it's been such a grueling schedule. I've gone grey. It's finally happened.
And haven't cut your hair for 6 years.
No, I'm kind of I'm kind of half. In our version of Milkwood, the first voice which I play does appear fleetingly in some moments. It's not a direct figure. It's an imagined presence, if you like. But I also play Captain Cat, and they could be one, one in the same. I think Captain Cat's interesting. The fact that Dylan initially wrote it, of course, for the radio, and that Captain Cat was made blind. And I think that Captain Cat has more emotional investment in this piece, more than any other character. There's kind of and I think the fact that he's blind enables a radio audience then to be rendered with the same superpower or disability, whichever way you look at it, as what. So he's a vessel as such for the audience to see, you know.
And apart from acting, you've also been closely involved in the production as a whole.
Yes, well, I mean, you know, Kevin and I wanted to do this. I wanted to do this since I did it on stage, you know.
What part did you play when you did it on stage?
I played the second voice at the National Theatre. And it struck me then, although it was a wonderful and brave production, we flew a lot of it. The whole dream sequence was flown and floated as if either underwater or in the air. There's the elements in this piece are very present, air and water. They're present throughout Dylan's body of work. But it struck me there was a point in that production where it's a scene where No Good Boyo is out on his boat, and these women appear to him, and he's out lonely in his boat, and it's quite, I don't remember the line specifically, but it's very clear that he's masturbating. It's as clear as day, and Milkwood is full of these, you know, beautiful innuendos and suggestive, sensual, erotic language. And we suggested then that just at one point, just to suggest the fact that that may be happening in this vessel, that he would just reach out and drop a handkerchief into the ocean. And it split the cast in two. Not necessarily, it wasn't a generational split, but some people thought that was rude and too crude, but it was there quite blatantly in the language, what was happening. And I remember thinking then, well, we're only doing this one section that's addressing this erotica in Dylan's piece, and it would be nice to explore that further. So, and that's what we're doing with this film, and it is by no means an intentionally, you know, it's not low pornography. This is sensual, and it's a celebration of the piece itself. It's a celebration of the seasons and of nature and of man's place in the cycle of life. It's about flesh. It's about death. It's quite a pagan piece in that sense, you know. So we're exploring that a little further, and we'd be very lucky to bring on board Marlais Young, who's a renowned poet, and Michael, who is I would call him a metaphysics guru. So there's not one instance in this film where an image is superfluous to the language. Everything is you know, it's kind of I guess it's a Jungian inquiry into Dylan's dream, or the dream of this village. So it should be a lot of fun.
And of course you're filming in 2 languages.
Yes.
How do you think the non-conformist Welsh are going to take to US?
Oh no, I mean there's non-conformist Welsh are as non-conformist as the non-conformist English, or English speaking. That doesn't bother me in the slightest. That doesn't worry me at all. I think hopefully what this film will do is bring people who have had in the past an aversion, say, to Dylan Thomas, might see his writing in a new light. There is a tendency, there has been a tendency in the past to in productions of Under Milk Wood certainly to present a kind of saccharine, stagnant idyll of Wales and Welsh life, you know, and it's become, I don't think it's been explored to its full passionate hilt. It will ruffle a few feathers, hopefully. I wouldn't be involved if that wasn't the case. And I apologise now if anyone's offended, but really, I mean, I wouldn't go near a piece like this unless I absolutely adored the writing and the writer, and in this case I do. I think we should be prouder of Dylan Thomas than every single one of our castles here in Wales, without question.
And does filming in 2 languages pose any problems to you?
No, it doesn't. Funnily enough, I have to say, Will Parkness, who translated it, it's a magnificent translation. And in many ways, I think he'd say it himself, it isn't a translation as such, it's an adaptation, you know, because there's so much of that, of the musicality of the Welsh language, and also, you know, Dylan often, you know, unbeknownst to himself, I'd imagine, writes in Cwmdonkin, you know, which is a very kind of strict and ancient form of Welsh poetry. Do not go gentle into that good night, for example, is a Cwmdonkin. So there is that kind of, there's a very Welsh cadence to and timbre to the whole piece anyway. So it's wonderful to be able to do it in both languages, and I think Dylan, unbeknownst to him, has served the Welsh language very well, you know, in his writing.
And of course, it's worth pointing out that Jim Parkness is a former archdruid of Wales.
Absolutely.
So,
well,
so
no, I mean, if anyone knows his words, it's Jim, you know. So it really is quite. You know, I feel very, very lucky to be able to present this piece in 2 languages, you know, and yeah. And
you've just played Dylan in another film.
Yes, I just finished. I just played Dylan Thomas in a film called Dominion with John Malkovich, and that is that follows basically, well, Dylan's last days in the White Horse in New York. It's a dark piece.
Yeah. Was that shot in New York?
That was shot in New York and in Toronto in Canada. And that'll be out sometime next year as well. So I have to say, as much as I love Dylan Thomas, after this film I am going on Dylan Thomas strike for a little bit.
You were telling me they were going to play Alice in Wonderland.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. So no more poets for me for a while, but it really will this year, this centenary year, and you know my whole. I really do feel, having played him, that I have a real kind of relationship with that man now, and I feel very moved and honoured and enlightened and inspired, having got to know Dylan and his writing.
And how would you sum him up as a person?
Hmm?
How would you sum him up as a person?
Well, as a person, I would say a boy struggling to be a man.
I think that's a very good and apt description. I think it's my understanding is that this little boy from Swansea went up to London as a 19-year-old, came running back to Mam at any chance he could get.
Yeah, and that's what I would say is it's a
then
boy.
Mam moved away, and he ended up in a very dysfunctional marriage.
Yeah, and I think that you know was for his emotional life that was his demise. And I think, you know, of course, you know, we bring up the spectre of drink, but I think in those days drink would have initially, of course, been fun to him, and then it would have had a medicinal function. And whether
of course
it is
people
whether
went to the pub much more often, didn't
yes,
they?
of course, and
there were more pubs.
We didn't have therapy and all these things then, thank God, possibly.
Or
you know.
Tesco.
No, or Tesco, you know, or Diamond White, yes. You know. So I think, yes, I do think, you know, and I think I am kind of qualified to say that, but I think he's a boy who broke his wings trying to become a man.
Yeah. Rhys Ifans, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.